In this episode of Middle East Files, a look at the rise of the Turkish Justice and Development Party. How the zero problems policy turned to a dilemma after the Syrian crisis. Will Prime Minister Erdogan end up a winner or a loser? Turkey, a policy of miscalculations. In this episode of Middle East Files.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Middle East Files, coming to you from the Turkish city of Istanbul. I'm Lamis Karu. In 2002, the Justice and Development Party, also known as AKP, came into power after a period of economic crisis. The party continued to gain momentum up until the onset of the Syrian conflict, when the doctrine of zero problems with neighbors turned into a miscalculated policy. The AK Party, or Justice and Development Party, has been at the forefront of Turkey's political scene since the turn of the century. Its rise to power was not a smooth one. The Turkish judiciary filled two cases for the closure of the rising political party, one in 2002 and the other in 2008. But despite these hurdles, the party under the leadership of Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan continued to gain popularity and influence one election after another up until the onset of the Arab uprisings, or as some others put it, the Islamic awakening. The AK Party's growth internally matched with the rise of Turkish influence externally, most notably in the region's hot affairs. Turkey's political and economical influence in the troubled Middle East grew significantly in the first decade of the 21st century. Some attribute this growth to Turkey stopping its Western quest and its attempt to join the European Union. Instead, it focused on its neighbors in shifting maps of a region under attack by the United States. The key architects of the Turkish foreign policy is Ahmet Davutoglu. Davutoglu was appointed as foreign minister in the Erdogan cabinet on May 1, 2009. His involvement in the crafting of Turkey's foreign policy goes back to 2003, when he joined Erdogan's team as a foreign policy advisor. Davutoglu's regional politics initiative was coined Zero Problems with Neighbors, as Turkey sought over a decade to build diplomatic and economic ties with all players in a region rife with conflict. In the spring of 2011, the Arab uprising rocked the region and brought an end to Davutoglu's Zero Problems. Discussing our first file even further is Mr. Alfer Bridal, and he's the editor-in-chief of the Turkish Soul newspaper. After more than a decade of Turkish Foreign Minister Ahmet Davutoglu's zero problems policy, how can we describe the relationship with Turkey and neighboring countries?
I think we can describe it as all problems policy right now, because the biggest problem is, of course, with Syria. But not only with Syria, with Iraq as well, and we have tensions with Iran, we have tensions with Russia, and we have tensions with Cyprus. So we have also increasing tensions with the United States now and with the European Union. We can say that it's completely failed, but I believe there's a continuity here, because the zero problems policy didn't aim to have zero problems with the neighbors. Actually, the aim was to develop a hegemony in the region based on the hegemony of the United States, in accommodation with the United States. This objective also perceives that there will be some kind of tension, even war, at the end of it. So they knew it from the start. And now we are in the phase of a complete failure, because they couldn't achieve the objective and they have tension.
What do you mean by a war at the end of this?
Well, since it's a game of changing all the balances in the region, in a region like Middle East, it has the risk of getting engaged in a war. And in fact,
you mean a war on Turkish soil, though?
Yeah, of course. And in fact, Turkey is per se in a war with Syria now, and we have bombs exploding all over Turkey. We have people getting caught in different towns of Turkey, and we have almost over 1 million refugees living in Turkey from Syria. So this is a situation of war. It's maybe not an all-out war. The Turkish army is providing coverage with artillery fire, with tanks, with logistic supports to these militants. And from the latest spillover, the leaked tapes from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we know that those people are organically organized and sent to Syria by the Turkish government, never challenged the policies of the United States. For example, you never see Turkey challenging the war in Libya or challenging the war in Iraq. They supported it. And they supported the intervention in Syria as well. But they also want their own special role, because they want to rule this region as their hinterland. And this failed because there are very many different forces in this region. We have Russia, we have Iran, we have a strong and legitimate government in Syria. And these are real forces in this region. It's not that easy to change all the balances. Even the United States can't do that in Iraq for more than 10 years now.
Mr. Alfer, how can we describe Turkey's relationship with Iran? Now, of course, they have disagreed when it came down to the Syrian issue, but really, it's not really clear how Turkey and Iran's relationship is going as of now. Give us your comments here, please.
I think we can say there's a complete hypocrisy in Turkey's policies towards Iran. On the surface, we don't see a clear tension apart from the issue of Syria, which is a huge, actually, because Turkey set out itself for a role in the Middle East to be the central power of a Sunni axis, which is against the political influence of Iran in the region, in the complete region. Actually, this was one of the major objectives of this policy, to pull Iran out of the region. And Iran, of course, is aware of that. But on the other hand, they were trying to keep an image, keep a surface image in the region that Turkey, the AKP, is an independent actor. So it can relate with any force, with Russia, with Iran, with Iraq, with the Kurds, etc. Which is contradictory in its essence, because your ambition is to pull Iran out of the region, and you are trying to create good relations with the same country. We see how this hypocrisy works with the corruption case in Turkey as it erupted in the 17th of December. We see that they helped Iran to get the oil money, to get around the US and EU sanctions. via Turkey, via the AKP especially. And we also seen that this party is, how corrupt this party is, because they benefited from it, from this difficult situation in which Iran is, in billions of dollars. So we see a complete hypocrisy, I believe.
Turkey was once boastful over its foreign policy based on good relations with neighboring countries. But once the Syrian crisis began, a different scenario emerged. Under Erdogan, Turkey was directly involved in the Syrian crisis, as his support for the Muslim Brotherhood put Turkey at an aggressive stance against Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's government. Let's take a look at the role Turkey is playing when it comes down to the Syrian crisis. After a frigid relationship between Turkey and neighboring Syria throughout the 1990s, zero problems brought a thaw to the tensions and opened up the borders between the two countries. A 2007 free trade agreement increased bilateral trade from 796 million United States dollars in 2006 to 2.5 billion United States dollars in 2010. In 2009, visa requirements were abolished, allowing for citizens to cross the borders freely. This flourishing relationship came to an abrupt end when Ankara sided with the opposition at the onset of the proxy war on Syria by some of the Persian Gulf Arab states. 106,000 trucks carrying Turkish goods crossed into Syria in 2010. That number dropped to 13,000 in 2012. Turkey became home to many leaders of the so-called Free Syrian Army and the main supply route of foreign militants taking on the Syrian government. Recep Tayyip Erdogan iterated in more than one occasion that Bashar al-Assad's days were numbered and hence established the Syrian National Council in Istanbul. The zero problems with neighbors was abandoned, propagating the anti-Assad alliance would dislodge the Ba'ath Party from power in Damascus, and a loyal to Ankara Muslim Brotherhood government would be a replacement. Turkey's support for the opposition in Syria and the Muslim Brotherhood factions in particular strained its relationship with a couple of neighbors. Ankara was one of the most vocal supporters of President Mohamed Morsi and strongly opposed his ouster in July 2013. It led to a tense relationship with the ruling military in Cairo. However, after the anti-Assad alliance flattered in its effort to topple the Syrian government, infighting within different militant groups left the Muslim Brotherhood brigades crippled. Ahmed Davutoglu was once again called upon to revive his zero problems with neighbors doctrine. However, the damage done by Ankara's involvement in the war on the Syrian government will take more than diplomatic talks to mend. Further discussing Turkey's role in Syria is Mr. Ali Ornik, a journalist. Why did Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his party take such a firm stance against Syria, despite the strong relations they had once? And recently we heard Erdogan saying that now they are at a stage of war against Syria. What are your comments here?
During the peaceful period between Turkey and Syria, Turkey had aims to be a regional leader, the leader of the region. And they try to convince Syria to be part of their regional hegemony. But Syria didn't convince that role, because this role includes standing away from Hezbollah, standing away from resistance axis. Recently, Erdogan said that they are in a stage of war with Syria. The recent polls showing that 70% of the Turkish society is against Erdogan's policies regarding Syria.
It's because they're scared of maybe the spillover that might take place?
Yes, precisely. There were two armed attacks in Turkey carried out by militants from Syria. In Istanbul also, the clashes, there were clashes between armed groups and Turkish police force. So Turkish people have, I think, fear of turning into another Pakistan, especially those living in border towns. They are mostly Alawite, Arab Alawis, and they are strongly supporting Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, and they said, okay, we are the next target right now.
Do you think Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan is trying to carry maybe this hidden agenda to place the Muslim Brotherhood here in the region?
Turkey is wanting to topple Assad, while they want also Muslim Brotherhood in power. If Muslim Brotherhood takes the charge in Syria, they will do whatever whatever Erdogan wants in the region.
So then what do you say about Turkey's deteriorating relationship with Egypt after the ouster of Morsi?
This is, I think, partly related with Syria. Turkey's regional policy depends on Muslim Brotherhood in the region. When Morsi was toppled by the coup in July, Erdogan used very harsh words against new Sisi-dominated interim government. Okay, let's finish that.
And what else do you have to say, maybe final words here about Turkey's intervention in Syria? I mean, how long are we going to see this intervention take place, perhaps?
Turkey is destroying Syria, and they said they are doing this on behalf of Syrian people. The recent attack on Kasab, it is carried out from Turkish border, you know. Turkey opens the border to all Takfir groups to attack Kasab, and they destroyed the whole town. This is a very sad thing to see.
What was the reason actually then behind the attack on Kasab?
I think Turkey tries to say to the United States that I'm still in Syria. I have my own vision. I have my own agenda. The result is millions of refugees, destroyed towns. I think Assad and his ally Hezbollah is now more stronger than has ever been.
I'm standing at Ghazi Park, where protests initially erupted. What started as demonstrations against the destruction of this park turned into protests against AKP's abuse of power. Today, protesting here is completely forbidden. Our third file has all the details. As chances of an outcome favorable to Ankara diminished in Syria, Recep Tayyip Erdogan's failed war gamble backfired at home. In May of 2013, the grumblings against the AKP rule in Turkey exploded on the streets of Istanbul. What started as sit-ins against the destruction of Ghazi Park near the central square of Taksim turned into nationwide protests against the AKP's abuse of power. Erdogan's government have been showing signs of authoritarianism by clamping down on dissents. Journalists were jailed in record numbers under Erdogan's rule. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, Turkey was the country with the most jailed journalists in the world in 2012, and again in 2013. The AKP has also been consolidating its supremacy over the military. According to Brookings Institute, in 2012, half of all Turkish admirals and 1 out of 10 active duty generals were in jail for plotting against the government. While the initial wave of protests was quelled by Turkish police, opposition to the AKP grew bolder and became more visible. Protests erupted again in September and October of 2013 against road construction through the green area of the Middle Eastern Technical University. However, it was a corruption scandal that broke in December of 2013 that presented the biggest threat to Erdogan's political career. The scandal initially implicated family members of a number of ministers in Recep Tayyip Erdogan's cabinet, in addition to mayors and other officials from his party. Erdogan accused former ally Fethullah Gulen of being behind the scandal. Gulen, who resides in the United States and leads the Hizmet movement, has a powerful network of schools and institutions across Turkey. But Erdogan's corruption scandal did not stop at AKP members. In February 2014, some tapes leaked out that allegedly included the voice of Erdogan himself, instructing his son Bilal to get rid of millions of euros stowed away in the latter's home. Could this be the end of Erdogan and the AKP's 11-year stranglehold on Turkish government? Joining me to discuss internal troubles in Turkey is Dr. Can Emirtan, historian and journalist. Dr. Can, I want to begin with discussing Turkey's internal policies. I mean, it's really been quoted by many as a complete mess. What are your comments here?
Well, at the moment, it really is a complete mess. Last year's Gezi protests, for the first time in more than a decade, uncovered really very wide, deep spread dissatisfaction with the local government. It's not that the dissatisfaction wasn't there previously, but until the Gezi protests, opposition voices really had no opportunity to speak out. So the Gezi protest functioned as a lightning rod, attracting all kinds of opposition, all kinds of dissatisfaction with the way the government has been run for the past decade. And now, with the corruption scandal which emerged on the 17th of December, the whole thing has come out in the open, and it's like, to quote your own word, it's a real mess.
Well, Dr. Can, you did know a few times about the corruption scandal, but Erdogan has reiterated a few times that he has been innocent. What are your comments here?
Well, Turkish politics have always been marred in sleaze and corruption. Traditional Turkish parties, I mean, corruption was just a byword for politics in Turkey. Every politician in Turkey was very busy to build up his own dynasty, or her own dynasty, to have money and income for him or herself and their offspring, their family. The AKP was seen as a departure from that tradition, as a party not mired in corruption, no connection with sleaze whatsoever. But now that these tapes have emerged on the 17th of December, all these allegations, it has become clear that the AKP is not really a different party. It's just another Turkish political party marred in sleaze and corruption.
Dr. Can, we see multiple protests take place in Turkey. Taksim Square, this park we're sitting in right now in Karaköy. They started off when citizens demonstrated over the destruction of Gezi Park, but it turned into something much wider. Please give us your comments here.
The protests, which began last year, started out in reaction to the destruction of Gezi Park, which was part of a wider government drive to encourage construction all over the country. And this construction goes hand in hand with the destruction of nature. And that was the initial impetus of the protests. But these protests quickly changed into something else. Everybody with a grudge against the government tagged on to the protest and made it his or her own protest against the government. And the current corruption allegations are actually very much part of those protests, of those issues, because the government's encouragement of building and construction is one of the areas which are very much part and parcel of these corruption allegations. Certain contractors, certain building sites, building companies have very close ties to the government, and they have given the government kickbacks and received favorable treatment in return. In other words, it all goes hand in hand. And the protests that are now taking place are really a continuation of last year's protests.
Dr. Can, what do you have to say about the future here when it comes down to Erdogan and the AKP? I mean, how optimistic are you?
I think for them to disappear like that just in one day, I think that would be unrealistic. I think their substructure has been so much established throughout the country, and the power base is here and is really widespread. I think for them to disappear like that overnight, I don't think that's going to happen. So they will continue.
Turkey's ambitions in taking a leading role in the Middle East have faded away. Turkey's failures, whether it being on the domestic, regional, or even the international scale, have left many unanswered questions as to what's next for Turkey's future. Questions such as what's next for Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his party? And what kind of legacy will this government, who had messy internal and external policies, leave behind? Thank you so much for watching this episode of Middle East Files. Until next time, goodbye.